The day had been long and dry, the kind of day that baked the soil and cracked the air itself. When the sound of a horse's hooves broke through the stillness of the Bennett homestead, Mary Lou lifted her head from the wash basin, her hands dripping with soapy water, her heart immediately tightening. Strangers didn't come this way anymore. Not since her father had taken ill, not since the debts had piled like stones around their name. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the front porch. The air carried dust, shimmering in the late afternoon light, turning everything gold. At the edge of the yard, a black stallion trotted into view, proud, sleek, and clearly expensive. The man riding him sat tall, his back straight as a fence post, his hat low enough to shade his eyes. Mary Lou squinted. The closer he came, the more she saw of him. Fine leather gloves, a dark coat trimmed in worn silver thread, boots polished to a mirror's shine. He wasn't from around here. He was a man of means. That alone was enough to make her nervous. The horse slowed to a stop, dust billowing around them. He dismounted smoothly, landing on the earth like he belonged to it. "Afternoon," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep, steady, the kind that could command men or silence a room. "You must be Miss Bennett." She nodded slowly. "That's right. My father's resting. He's not well today." The man's gray eyes softened briefly before sharpening again. "Name's Colt Harrison," he said, drawing something from his coat, a folded piece of paper, creased and worn. "I'm here on account of a debt owed." Mary Lou's stomach dropped. She'd known this moment was coming, but she'd prayed it might pass her by. "My father's been meaning to ride into town," she said quickly, her voice trembling but polite. "He just hasn't had the strength lately. Once he's better—" Colt cut her off gently but firmly. "Ma'am, this loan's been unpaid for months. I gave your pa time. I gave him grace. But I can't let it go forever." His tone wasn't cruel, but it carried a weight that pressed down on her chest. She looked past him, toward the distant hills where the sun was dying, and wished the world would just stop spinning for a moment. She took a breath. "We'll pay you," she said, trying to sound stronger than she felt. "The harvest will come soon, and we'll make it right." Colt's jaw flexed, and for a long second he said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he sighed and looked away toward the house. "I don't doubt your word, Miss Bennett. But the truth is, I came out here not just for payment. I came to see what kind of man your father had become." There was something in his tone. Not judgment, not exactly pity, but something close to remembrance. "You knew my father?" she asked. He nodded once. "Worked with him years ago, back when my pa still ran our ranch. He taught me how to set a broken fence post, how to calm a spooked mare. He was a good man." Mary Lou's throat tightened. Her father's good years had been long buried under sickness and debt. "He still is," she said softly. "I believe that," Colt replied. He folded the paper slowly, slipping it back into his vest. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the creak of the porch boards beneath her bare feet. Finally, she asked, "So why come here yourself? A man like you could send a lawyer or the sheriff." Colt looked up at her then, his eyes unreadable. "Because I don't like sending other men to do my hard work. And because some debts aren't about money." Mary Lou frowned. "What do you mean?" He stepped closer, one hand resting lightly on the railing. The movement wasn't threatening, but it drew her attention to his presence, to the quiet strength in his frame, to the shadow of weariness etched into the corners of his face. "I mean," he said slowly, "I don't want to take your land or your father's dignity, but I can't just walk away from what's owed. So I came to see if there was another way." Her heart thudded. "Another way?" He nodded, his eyes steady on hers. "You can't pay with coin, but you can pay with work. I've got a ranch 2 days west of here, needs tending. Housekeeper, cook, someone to manage the books. I'll call the debt cleared if you come work for me." The world seemed to tilt. "You want me to leave?" "I want to make sure your father keeps his home," Colt said quietly. "This is the only way I can do that." Her eyes burned. She looked back toward the doorway, where the sound of her father's cough echoed weakly through the house. He'd been getting worse each week, and she'd been doing everything, selling preserves, sewing for neighbors, anything to keep the roof over them. She'd prayed for mercy. Was this mercy? She shook her head, half in disbelief, half in defense. I don't know you, Mr. Harrison. I'm not asking you to, he replied. Not yet. His tone softened, the edge fading from it. All I'm offering is work and safety. You have my word. No harm will come to you. She studied him, unsure if she could trust what she saw. Beneath his wealth, beneath the calm authority, there was something lonely in him, something broken. It showed in the way his gaze lingered not on her face, but on the house behind her, as though he understood what it meant to lose everything you loved. Her voice trembled. And my father? He keeps the land? He keeps it, Colt said firmly. I'll see to it myself. No man will come to take it while I live. A gust of wind swept between them, carrying the scent of the desert, sage, dust, and something faintly sweet. The sky had deepened to a copper red, and his shadow stretched long across the porch. She realized then that this was not a cruel man, though his face bore the marks of a hard life. He was a man who had seen loss and turned it into armor. Still, she hesitated. If I go with you, she said quietly, people will talk. Colt gave a small, humorless smile. People always do. Her chest rose and fell with a deep, trembling breath. She thought of her father's frail frame lying in bed, of the empty shelves, of the long nights she'd spent praying by candlelight for a miracle that never came. Maybe this was the answer. Maybe miracles didn't come as angels. Maybe they came on horseback, with gray eyes and calloused hands. She lifted her gaze to meet his. All right, she whispered. Colt's expression didn't change much, but something in his eyes softened. He stepped closer, his voice quiet as dusk. Then gather what you need. We ride at first light. The morning broke over the desert with a quiet sort of light, soft and pale, the kind that hides the world in silver mist before the sun decides to show its face. Mary Lou sat in the back of Colt Harrison's wagon, her hands folded in her lap, her old bonnet pulled low against the dawn chill. Every creak of the wheels seemed to echo her heartbeat. Steady, uncertain, and a little scared. They'd left her home before sunrise. Her father had watched from the porch, his frail frame wrapped in a blanket, his eyes watery with pride and pain. He'd told her she was brave. She wasn't sure she believed him. All she felt was the emptiness that comes when a piece of your life is left behind. Colt rode ahead on his black stallion, the reins loose in his gloved hands. His posture never changed, tall, straight, unshakable, but every now and then he'd turn slightly, just enough to make sure the wagon was still rolling behind him. He hadn't said much since they left. Neither had she. Words seemed too fragile in the cold air. Hours passed in silence. The desert began to wake, the shimmer of heat rising off the sand, the cry of a hawk overhead, the long stretch of open land that felt endless. It was beautiful and cruel all at once, the kind of place that tested the shape of a person's heart. By noon, they stopped near a dry creek bed to rest the horses. Colt dismounted and tied the reins to a low branch. He looked over at her, his face shadowed beneath his hat brim. You holding up all right, Miss Bennett? She nodded, though her throat was too dry for words. He gave a small nod of approval, then motioned toward the water trough. There's a spring just beyond that ridge. Go fill your canteen. I'll tend to the horses. She hesitated. Something about his tone, polite but firm, made her feel both safe and slightly out of her depth. She wasn't used to men like him. Not just the wealth or the way he carried himself, but the quiet command that lingered in everything he said. When she returned with the water, she found him sitting by the wagon, eating a strip of jerky. He offered her one. She took it shyly and sat across from him, the distance between them filled with unspoken things. He studied her for a moment, then said quietly, You've got courage. More than most men I've known. She blinked, startled by the compliment. I don't feel brave, she admitted. Just scared. He looked toward the horizon, his expression unreadable. Bravery ain't the absence of fear, Miss Bennet. It's moving anyway. She didn't know how to respond, so she just watched him instead, the way the sun caught the silver thread on his coat, the scar on his jaw, the tiredness he carried like a shadow. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe mid-30s, but there was something old in him, an ache that went deeper than the skin. "Mr. Harrison," she said after a while, "why do you do it?" He raised an eyebrow. "Do what?" "Well,